before I go into the full part of the talk, I want to, which is called Interbeing and the Beloved Community. I want to share with you that normally when I do a meditation on the Brahma Viharas, I'll choose one. Tonight, I did all four almost as the cue cards for the talk. So if you're wondering why we went through all four, it's to set it up for the talk. But normally I'll spend the whole time just on one. I just wanted to share that with you. I'll focus this Dharma talk on the power of connections of the beloved community, a term that Dr. Martin Luther King used, and interbeing, the term that Thich Nhat Hanh coined, and how these two visions, how these two concepts, how these two, work together. So we begin February with a month-long celebration of Black History Month. And Black History Month, it may seem new to some, but it dates back over a century ago when Carter Woodson, who was an author, historian, and writer, wanted to bring light to the achievements of Black Americans. So he established Negro History Week in 1926. So when I say a century, it really was a century, almost a century ago. And so he's considered the father of Black History Month. He chose February, not because it was the shortest month, like some people think, but because it's the month that both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, who I don't think really knew his actual birth date, but they chose to celebrate their birthdays in February, so it seemed appropriate for February. And although the efforts began in about 1940 to expand that week into a month, it took a few decades. It wasn't until the 70s that there was sort of national recognition of Black History Month. And that came with actually all of the presidents during their terms would declare and honor February as Black History Month, with proclamations honoring it. So it began, though, if you think about Carter Woodson, it began with a sense of loving kindness and pride as to his accomplishments and the accomplishments of African Americans. And that extended, that sense of loving kindness and pride extended into compassion and community and celebration of community and joy, and also established a foundation for equanimity. Equanimity to persevere in the face of adversity. And each year there's a theme for Black History Month. This year, the theme is labor, honoring the work that African Americans have done and continue to do, whether paid or unpaid, whether forced or free. Our labor, seen and unseen, has shaped America's political, cultural, and spiritual history. Therefore, Black History Month is everyone's history. And this labor, these visions, are shared by many, including immigrants and others from the African diaspora, as well as allies of all races. This is what Sangha is. This is what support is. As I reflect on the profound connective roots between spirituality, Black cultural history, and the Dharma, these threads are deeply interwoven. Just sit with that for a minute. Deeply interwoven, because together we can honor these connective roots, lineages, individuals, everyday people, and prominent people who have drawn upon wisdom, spiritual traditions, love, and community to shape the path that has brought all of us here to this moment. That's what we talk about, interconnectedness, okay? The friendship between Dr. Martin Luther King and Thich Nhat Hanh was a spiritual and a political relationship. And it was reflected in their shared commitment to peace and a belief, a strong belief in our innate humanity. It is what Thich Nhat Hanh referred to as interbeing, that interconnectedness. Anything that happens to one is impacted and happens to everyone. And he coined the term engaged Buddhism, which you're seeing much more over the last few decades, with people realizing that spiritual life doesn't have to be separate from activism. These two leaders emerged from vastly different cultural and spiritual traditions. One a Baptist, Black Baptist from the South, Atlanta, the other monastic from Vietnam. They came together. It was like, I think of it as roots, weaving themselves across the continents and the ocean, just as our roots have woven us all here to tonight from Europe and Asia and the African continent, from all over. So though they came from very different cultural and spiritual backgrounds, um, they came together to hold sacred space. And when I talk about compassion, it isn't just empathy, it's holding space for that pain, for that suffering. They came together to hold sacred space, walk for peace, and demonstrate the transformative power of collective action. It's collective action. They first met in 1966. They'd been writing each other, I think, since 65. Now, I'm not a historian or a scholar on both, but they began writing to each other. And Thich Nhat Hanh was writing about the Vietnam War, how it was affecting his country. Martin Luther King read his works and decided that he had a kindred spirit in this. And then they met again in 1967 at an international peace conference in Geneva. Now, Dr. King had received the Nobel Prize in 1964 for peace, much to the chagrin of some Southern politicians. It was very racist. I don't know if it's any different now, but blatantly so, and really thought he didn't deserve it. But Thich Nhat Hanh paid attention to it, and Dr. King nominated Thich Nhat Hanh for the Nobel Prize in 1967. So there was this mutual change of ideas and values, and they came together around the war in Vietnam, and it inspired Dr. King to really take a look at it and speak out against it. They saw the commonality in their life's purposes, and they simply saw each other. So when we talk about the Brahma Viharas and we're sending metta and compassion, it means we're looking at each other and seeing each other. Thich Nhat Hanh drew inspiration from Dr. King's courage because he knew he was in grave danger, as did Dr. King, knew that he was. And Thich Nhat Hanh, or Thai as he's referred to, wrote about the despair he felt. He said it was one of the lowest periods in his life. When these are his words, "When I heard the news, I was devastated. I could not eat, I could not sleep. I made a deep vow to continue building what he called the beloved community, not only for myself, but also for him." So he knew that Dr. King had spoke about the beloved community, and he said, I'm going to continue for him and for everyone. He came to believe, Thich Nhat Hanh, that the work of enlightened beings doesn't end with death, that it continues to be with us, helping us manifest the beloved community, promoting interbeing. And his idea of community expanded, including not just human life, but all of life. He was committed to his work, and I want to talk a little bit about that term, the beloved community. Some of you may have heard it before. Dr. King used it throughout his work, but it was developed by a man named Josiah Royce, who was a Harvard professor. I don't know, I think it might have been in like the turn of the century, 1903 or something like that. And he said, my life means nothing either theoretically or practically, unless I'm a member of a community. He observed that besides the actual communities we experience in our daily lives, there's also an ideal beloved community made up of all those who are dedicated to the cause of loyalty and truth. So it was used by him, but also a theologian that you may know, black theologian, civil rights leader, philosopher named Howard Thurman, who felt that it required the personal transformation. That personal transformation becomes the seed to blossom, to grow, and extend towards others for a broader transformation. So I think of it when I read that, I think of it as, the dandelion, when you blow on the seed, when it's gone to seed and it scatters. So I think of that sense of beloved community and that sense of self. And Dr. King said that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. What affects one directly affects all indirectly. This is the interrelated structure of reality. So they both spoke about this. Other scholars and activists have reflected on the beloved community in their work to address racism, sexism, global violence, climate change, knowing that it takes the entire community, a sangha, a dedication, mindfulness, intention to bring about change. So many leaders have carried forth this concept. However, if we just focus on the icons, when we celebrate Black History Month, it's Martin Luther King and Frederick Luck. If we just focus on the icons, we miss the stories of all the ordinary people. And I shouldn't even use the word ordinary people because no one's ordinary, but those that are behind the scenes, quieter, that have unsung in many ways. They exemplify, your family did too, the divine abodes, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So these people exemplified the divine abodes and the Brahma Viharas. There are many that contributed with their bravery, their brilliance, their creativity, innovation, scientists, visionaries, artists, and some who you may or may not heard of. One of these people I want to share with you, and that's why I wanted to bring it down with the Brahma Viharas to to you and someone. Her name was, she's passed on, Oseola McCarty. I don't know if anyone has heard of Oseola McCarty. Now don't Google it, just tell me if you have. And there's no judgment. I just want to share in that joy of you knowing who she is. She is a woman who washed other people's clothes, what some people refer to as a washerwoman. I don't hear that term anymore, and she gave away a big chunk of her life savings, $150,000. She got paid in cash, and she saved every dollar. She gave away $150,000. I think she was in her 80s or 90s at the time, to help complete strangers get a college education. She wanted to target African American students at the University of Southern Mississippi, but she was open to all students. For over 60 years, she washed other people's clothes, and she saved all of that money. She never owned a car. She walked everywhere. She walked to the grocery store. She was very frugal. She taped up her shoes when they were broken. They had to convince her to buy an air conditioner. She had a black and white TV because she was taught to be frugal, and she was taught to save her money. But she went to church every Sunday. Someone picked her up, and she made sure she was a good steward of her funds. She put aside 10% for the church, that was her tithe, 10% each for 3 relatives, and the majority, 60%, for the college students, people she did not know. So not only was she exemplifying the Brahma Viharas, right? The loving kindness, the compassion for those who can't afford it, the joy that people make it to college, and that she kept steadfast in her resolve with equanimity. She also exemplified the first parami, or perfections, which is generosity. That is one that marked her life. So we celebrate remarkable contributions of others like Osceola's. You may know others who have upheld and continue to lift humanity. Those who organized marches, ran free breakfast programs, steadied themselves in places of worship, fostering that mudita, ran free breakfast programs. I mentioned that already. And they built community with resolve in the midst of hatred and unspeakable adversity, guided by love, the enduring spirit of ancestors, and grounded in diverse manifestations of the divine abodes without calling them the divine abodes or without calling them the Brahma Viharas. Loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy, and equanimity. These qualities are not unique to Buddhism, and they're practiced in many other traditions: Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, and including indigenous spiritual practices around the world. Otherwise, none of these cultures would have survived without these qualities, these highest of qualities. So what does it mean for Buddhist and mindfulness practitioners, for us around this Sangha this week and every week? What's the interconnection between our practice, Black History Month or other months that support different groups? How do we recognize the presence of the divine abodes in all people who make up this country? As Buddhists, we recognize that action, not just empathy or loving kindness, is needed. It comes in the form of compassion, taking action. So let's celebrate our roles, our opportunities to transform and transcend, and reflect on how we express compassion, how we celebrate others, and how we stay steadfast in the midst of everything. And just reflecting on, I mentioned that the Brahma Viharas are like little cue cards you carry around. When I carry them around in my head, and when I am having conflict or having a hard time sending metta to someone, could be a public figure who I feel is causing harm, serious and grave harm, or will cause harm, I have to shift it and recognize that it's hard. Maybe I do a little percent every day, and I can shift that metta and loving kindness to the recipients of those actions. I also remember that people who suffer, who cause suffering, or hurt people. That saying, hurt people, and I have to remember that. And there are no shoulds with this talk. As Rick emphasized last week, it's what you can work towards, what you can integrate into your practice. So first we recognize our own path. How do we do this? To awakening through insight. How do you do that? Well, you sit, some of you sit, most of you sit, meditation, different kinds of meditation, an awareness of what is around you, an awareness of what's going on in you. It's like, that's what's going on. Not overanalyzing, but just recognizing where those sensations, when there are challenges or stress, show up in our bodies. Is it in the belly? Is it in the heart? Is it in the head? And working to soften that like we did in the meditation. Just breathing into that. Breathing into it means, I see you. I see you there, Mr. Judgmental or Miss Judgmental. I see you. I see you there, and I'm recognizing you there. How do we soften that? And with that softening and that awareness and that honesty comes a humility that we are practicing, we have work to do. And how about this, that we don't know everything? And we often don't need to know everything. There is a beauty in not knowing. That requires humility, a beauty in not knowing everything. So sitting with that for a second, about what it means to be open to all that you are and open to humility. The second tip, takeaway, besides the first, centering ourselves in our meditation, is connecting with community through spiritual friendships or formal sanghas, or however you connect with community. Some people say my running group is my sangha, my sewing group, my fishing group. There's a beauty and a sense and a collective energy that occurs in those communities. And if you have a spiritual community, how wonderful. This is the community, whether it's a couple of friends or one friend that you have a spiritual friendship with, or a big group. This is the community that reminds us to commit, holding us to our word, moving us and supporting our commitment to manifesting the qualities we want to cultivate in ourselves. And this community will point out when we're blind to seeing the beauty of other people. Sometimes this community, and be an individual, will say, well, you know what? I know that he was having a lot of back pain that day. Maybe that's why he or she was grumpy. This is the community that opens our lens a little bit. And we have to be grounded with our personal meditation and our practice to be open to Sangha and to offer something to our Sangha. One of our teachers, Noliwe Alexander here, she teaches at Spirit Rock and in other places, she said that through our teachings of non-separation and interconnection, that these teachings lie in the heart of the Dhamma. We're often reminded that illusion of separation is like a veil that obscures the deeper truth of our interconnected existence. It's like a veil. When we put up that block, it's like a veil. Bell Hooks, who has since transitioned a couple of years ago, the writer, poet, visionary, and a practitioner, she said, rarely, if ever, are any of us healed in isolation. Healing is an act of communion. So you can think of your beloved community, your Sangha, your group, as um, a way to commune, as communion, right? We ring the bell, sometimes we chant, depending on it. And the third one, so the first is your own practice, grounding, and being aware to what arises. The second is being in community or Sangha, opening up. And the third is taking action. This is where we move empathy and loving kindness to action. And we do this with humility and love. Being in environments, exposing ourselves to other communities, sometimes taking action, is going just a little bit deeper and understanding, bearing witness to what's going on, holding space for others. if possible. We're not all able to do it. This is understanding on a level. It doesn't condone behavior that causes harm, but understanding the causes and conditions of the suffering and working to mitigate perpetuation of these causes and conditions. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes patience. And I'll reflect just a little bit on how you may be aware that there are many policies that are disappearing and being in the United States right now. A lot of policies are being slashed and in some ways forbidden if people want funding. And it's a reminder that policies can reinforce maybe laws or some values, but it's really what we're talking about is morality. And if we expect policies to remain without morality, then we have this vicious cycle over and over again. They get instituted, they get destroyed. So it's the morality. And our hope is that this is what we cultivate as practitioners in Sangha. Shantideva, the 8th century teacher and philosopher, said, "With my body, I shall put this all into practice. What can be accomplished by mouthing it merely with words? After all, will a sick man be helped by merely reciting the medical treatment? If you went to the doctor and the doctor said, yep, this is what you have, and this is how you should be treated, but doesn't refer you, doesn't treat you on your own, you're back to square one. So it's that action, that act of compassion, that act of responsibility, that act of morality and ethics, sila. So how does this all tie together? An understanding of your own suffering allows others to begin understanding, allows you to begin understanding others. Not just strangers or people you read about, but our parents, our ancestors, our community. I remember my father, as a teenager, I thought, oh, he just doesn't want us to do anything. He's always so afraid. He's so afraid of everything. And then after he died, I read a letter that he wrote where he said that he had joined the Navy during Second World War. He lied about his age. He was only 15. He said he was 17 to get in. It was the British Navy in the colonies, right? And what he saw was a lot of horror at 15 as a boy. And he lost some really important papers, and he was accused of stealing them. And for 9 months he lived with the fear of he thought he would be executed for treason. He thought he'd be tried with treason because he lost it. He said he literally lost the papers. He was still a child, and he prayed and prayed and prayed, and they were found. And I didn't know this. And then I thought about, kind of all comes together now. His nervousness, his fear of always, doing the right thing. And so when I say that opening up allows us to begin understanding the suffering, including our parents and our ancestors, and then our community. And the joy in ourselves and others. So this isn't all about suffering and fear and challenges. It's really opening up to the joy in ourselves and in others. Separation causes suffering, and separation occurs where there's not enough insight, when that veil remains over the eyes. And so I wanted to share with you these two men coming together from different parts of the world who saw each other and heard each other. And can you imagine and how they supported each other, and after the death of one, the other continued in that vein, was empowered when he realized that he needed to continue. Can you imagine if either one had said, why should I be concerned myself with what's going on in Vietnam? It's not my country. Or why should I be concerned about what's going on in the American South? I don't live there. It's not my culture. I'm of a different race. They would have missed such a wonderful opportunity to have their roots find each other, to entwine, to be woven together, to strengthen and support everyone and uplift everyone. So this month and every month can be a reminder to honor the wealth of our shared experiences and accept the differences and the discomforts that arise with that awareness. There's beauty in humility and courage in creating a fertile ground for inclusivity and freedom. So as we practice, we are aware that this means beginning with an awareness of ourselves, our own suffering, and a recognition of humanity. It's a portal. Our practice, our sitting, is a portal to understanding and awakening. It requires intention and a keen desire to bear witness to everything that's going on, to celebrate the possibility of liberation of ourselves and others, and to do so with joy. It requires the recognition that there is so much power in the beloved community and in interbeing. And so I want to thank you so much for bearing witness, for listening, and supporting yourselves and the well-being of others. And I'll stop there. And I see there are lots of messages in. Of course, I won't be able to address all the questions, and I won't be able to. I see someone who is a World War vet, and oh yes, such sad, so many stories of sadness and resilience. And thank you everyone for the well wishes, for just your thoughts and your reflections. And others that are sharing how they participate in community, you know, how they participate regardless of religion and regardless of their background. Thank you so much. And another person, I think Tony from Montreal, is sharing another Sangha, Cloud Sangha, a member of, yes, Cloud Sangha, wonderful work Cloud Sangha does. Thank you for reminding us of that. And there are many more. And now what I can do, thank you. I'm reading about revolutionarylove.org. I've heard of Revolutionary Love with Valerie Kaur. Wanted to meet her for a long time, hoping to do that. Thank you for reminding me. And then the heroes. I think Thea said Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Bishop Tutu, Dalai Lama, and there are many more, as you mentioned. Two of your childhood women heroes, Harriet Tubman and Joan of Arc. Again, totally different cultures, but what is that commonality, that resolve, right? And Uh, Braver Angels. I haven't heard of Braver Angels. Thank you so much, Barry, for that information. And yes, Bayard Rustin. You learned quite a bit. It's been on Netflix. Bayard Rustin, who was a civil rights activist and LGBT community, and that is, I didn't get a chance to look at it before it left. And others are just sharing what other quotes. Justice is what I think Charmaine. Justice is what looks like in what love looks like in public, right? Yes. Yes. And of course, Jamie mentioned that, of course, Dr. King, not only was it Thich Nhat Hanh's advocacy, and talking about it, but realizing who was on the front lines, realizing who was on the front lines in Vietnam and the disparate deaths given the percentage of suffering. Barb Marley, One Love. So when I said that this beloved community is shared not just with the icons, but the neighbors and the artists and the poets and the writers, and saluting the Tuskegee Airmen and all of those uh, heroes and heroines. And so thank you, everyone. And now, if there are any questions, I don't have all the answers. I'm a student myself. I'm a lifelong student. Bill mentioned that I became a Zen student at 17. You'd think by now I'd be enlightened, right? It's a journey, it's lifelong. And the enlightenment comes in these insights, these light bulbs that go off, the sitting, the quieting, as opposed to the bolt for me from the sky, right? Many were waiting for that bolt to come down. I see Jamie shaking his head there, the bolt to come down from the sky. But so this is a time we have about 7 minutes or so, if there are any. Yeah, so loving kindness and compassion. Thank you. Loving kindness is the friendliness. So I think of it as the friendliness, okay? So I think of someone on the street who is unsheltered, an unsheltered person. Let me just take a sip. And you might walk by and smile and keep walking. And the difference with that, and I'm not saying everyone should do this, the difference with that and compassion is asking, have you eaten today? Can I get you something? Do you need to go somewhere? Okay, we're not all able to do that, and sometimes we do have to protect ourselves physically. I did the compassion thing, and I was sent away with a scream one day, and actually smiled because it was funny. I thought, how arrogant of me to assume, to make an assumption this person would accept it. So does that help? With a loving kindness, it's you can be empathetic with a loving kindness, but you've really got, it's taking it the next step and saying, I see you, I hear you. What can I do to support you? How can I move this to another level? How can I contribute? Or if you can't, can I find someone to help you move it to the other level? And so, any other questions? I won't pretend to know the answer, and I'll tell you if I don't. Yes, compassion in action. Maya Angelou was a wonderful teacher. Again, so much trauma as a child, and moved it into. You gave an omelet sandwich, yes, to someone. Sounds good. A minute on equanimity, meaning more. So I'll say it'll be a couple of minutes on equanimity. So think of equanimity. It's not especially being calm. You can be terrified, but still express equanimity. Think of equanimity as climbing to the top of a mountain and looking around and saying, oh, it isn't just woods. It's the ocean turns into sand, it turns into trees. It's having that view. If you think of it as having oversight, to overlook, but it doesn't mean to ignore. It means to, let me do this, to look over, not overlook, but to look over, to be able to take in the full view of what's going on, centering in yourself and knowing that there's impermanence. I think of equanimity visually as bamboo, deep roots that keep it upright, bending to the right, bending to the left, and then finding that place in the middle. So it's not negating the sorrow, it's not going off with ecstasy, it's it's knowing that they both exist in life, where there's joy, where there's sorrow, and staying as best as you can in the middle. It's okay if you tip, but your practice, your faith, your resolve brings you to the middle. So it's that sense. And one of the images that they use in Zen Buddhism at time is grandmother hands. Equanimity is that soft front, like a grandma would hold a child, and strong back. It's both. It's embracing and seeing and feeling, and that strong back that supports us. I hope that helps with equanimity, and I'd love to. I think the last time I was here, maybe not, but I would, if next time I come back, I'll just do a whole session on equanimity, because as one teacher, Doral Williams, says, it's the bass drum. It's the underpinning of loving kindness. You've got to be settled enough to see the beauty in yourselves. It's the underpinning that allows you the confidence to go forward with compassion. It's the underpinning of appreciative joy. You've got to feel stable to be able to celebrate someone without jealousy or judgment. It's the bass drum that shows up in all of those divine abodes. So it's the foundation.